It was a crisp autumn morning when the fishermen arrived at the riverbank, their boats creaking against the wooden piers as they pushed off into the misty water. The sky was painted with soft hues of orange and pink, but there was an unsettling quietness in the air, a kind of stillness that made the usual sounds of the river seem distant. As the boat bobbed gently along, John, the more experienced of the two, squinted his eyes ahead. There on the shore stood a dog. At first it seemed like any other dog, roughly the size of a medium-sized shepherd, his fur damp from the early morning mist. But there was something different about this dog. It wasn't running freely or playing like the others that they sometimes saw from their boat. No, this dog stood completely still, its gaze fixed on the river, unblinking, unwavering. John turned to Michael, his younger fishing partner, a puzzled look on his face. "That dog's been there for hours," he said, his voice low. Michael glanced at him, his brow furrowed. "Maybe it's lost?" he suggested. But John shook his head, already knowing that wasn't the case. The dog's fur wasn't matted, nor did it seem like one of those strays that had been abandoned and left to fend for itself. There was an alertness in its stance, a sense of purpose. It stood there as though it was guarding the river, watching, waiting. The duo continued their journey, but every few minutes their eyes would drift back to the mysterious dog. Something about its presence gnawed at their minds. Hours passed as they continued fishing, the sun rising higher in the sky, but the dog never moved. It simply stood there, staring into the river, its gaze never faltering, and that's when it happened. A muffled cry echoed from the other side of the river, a cry so faint that it almost blended with the sounds of the flowing water. The dog's head snapped towards the noise, its ears perked. Without warning, it darted into the woods that lined the riverbank. John and Michael exchanged confused looks. "That wasn't a normal reaction for a dog. Did you hear that?" Michael asked, his voice strained. John nodded. "Let's check it out." The two of them hastily climbed off their boats and made their way through the brush and into the woods. The undergrowth was dense, but they could hear the dog's paws hitting the ground like thunder. The sound of its pursuit was quick, swift, and sure. As they pushed through the trees, they finally saw the dog, its body poised and alert, standing over something small and fragile. It was a kitten, barely alive, struggling against the cold. John's heart sank. He had seen many things in his time as a fisherman, but nothing like this. The kitten was soaked, its fur matted, its body trembling uncontrollably. The dog stood over it, its eyes soft, but still, its position was protective. "Is it—" Michael began, but his voice trailed off. He knew what had to be done. They couldn't just leave the kitten to die here, especially when there was still hope. But the dog wasn't about to let anyone come near the kitten. Its growl, low and menacing, filled the air. It wasn't a territorial growl, it was a warning, a plea. John and Michael exchanged a glance. John knew what had to be done, but the dog had made it clear. Getting near the kitten wouldn't be easy. As they took a step forward, the dog bared its teeth, its stance now completely defensive. They stopped in their tracks. "This dog isn't just guarding it, it's protecting it," John murmured, awe and respect lacing his voice. After a long pause, John slowly knelt down, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. He knew the dog's distrust could be deadly if they weren't careful. The dog's eyes narrowed, but it didn't attack. "What do you think, Michael?" John asked, his voice just above a whisper. Michael, still in disbelief, looked at the dog and then at the kitten. It was clear the dog wasn't going to back down, but neither was it going to harm them, yet. The tension in the air was thick, and it felt like the world itself had paused in anticipation of the next move. Finally, John decided to take the plunge. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of jerky. He placed it on the ground just a few feet from the dog, hoping to gain its trust. The dog's nose twitched, and for a moment it hesitated. Then, to their surprise, it stepped away from the kitten and cautiously sniffed the jerky. John held his breath, not daring to move. The dog picked up the jerky and ate it slowly, its eyes never leaving John. Once it finished, the dog turned back to the kitten, still guarding it with an unwavering resolve. John slowly stood up and stepped closer to the trembling animal. With the dog watching closely, John gently scooped the kitten into his hands, feeling its frail, shivering body. It was small, fragile, barely breathing, but alive. It was then that the dog let out a single, soft bark. It wasn't a command or a threat, but a signal, a final act of trust. The fisherman stood frozen for a moment, understanding the weight of what had just occurred. The dog had saved the kitten, knowing that its life was at stake, and yet it wasn't ready to give up its post. It wasn't just guarding a river, it was protecting something much more vulnerable, a creature that needed its help. As they carried the kitten back to the boat, the dog watched from a distance, its eyes following them. It didn't follow them. It stayed behind, its gaze fixed on the path they had taken. It knew its job had been done. As the boat slowly drifted away, Michael turned to John, his voice thick with emotion. That dog. It knew John didn't say anything, but his thoughts were the same. The dog had done more than protect. It had acted on an instinct that most people would never understand. It was loyalty, it was love, and it was a bond that transcended species. The kitten was saved that day, thanks to the relentless devotion of a dog that would never give up. The fishermen's hearts were full, but they knew something would forever stay with them, the silent guardian of the riverbank. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.